Good morning, Hermosa Beach. I'm Max Riley. Welcome to today's edition of the Miss Tsosie Show. December 21st, 2015, the 14-story Falcon 9 rocket descended upon Cape Canaveral in Florida and landed, making history as the first stage to be brought back home. But what is the Falcon 9? In October 2002, eBay acquired PayPal for $1.5 billion. Elon Musk, a young South African computer engineer, walked away from the deal with $165 million. Most people in this position immediately retire and maybe invest a bit with new startups. 30-year-old Musk decided he was going to send a rocket to Mars. The quest to put a man on Mars began in a room of three men: Elon Musk, Adio Ressi, and Jim Cantrell. Each man was interested in the prospect of spreading civilization to the Red Planet. The men knew that they could not do this themselves. However, they wanted to gain public interest for a mission to Mars. But how? The group came up with an idea. They would send a craft, which would collect soil from the outside and plant some seeds in it. The plant's growth would be live-streamed back to Earth. If it lived, it would inspire children and scientists across the country. However, the men were worried. If the plant died, it would have the opposite effect. It could make the world view Mars as a scary, hostile place. The group decided that it would be worth the risk. If the public was interested in going to Mars, then maybe the government would be too. The three men got on a plane to Moscow. The old Soviet Union had made some of its old missiles available, and they were an ideal size for the launch. After quickly realizing the Russian rockets were too expensive, they went home. On the plane, Musk furiously typed on his laptop. He was onto something, but the other two men weren't quite sure what it was. Then he stopped and looked up. "Hey guys, I think we can make this rocket ourselves." He turned his laptop around. With a library of background knowledge, Musk had assembled a design for a rocket that would cost less than $6 million. Very cheap for a spacecraft. Not only useful for them, but for the growing market for small launches. When they arrived home, Musk and his team started. As everything began to fall into place, he temporarily abandoned the mission to Mars. This new rocket was going to be at the forefront of new space technologies. Rather than launching the bus-sized satellites popular with big corporations and science groups like NASA, this rocket would cater to smaller operations, offering a cheaper option to get budget-conscious groups off the ground. Space Exploration Technologies, often shortened to Spacex, was founded. They began working on a new rocket called the Falcon 9, named after the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. It had one Merlin 1A rocket in its first, largest stage, which would lift the craft through the atmosphere. This large fuel tank would fall away from the craft, leaving the second stage to complete the rest of the journey. The second stage, complete with a Kestrel engine, would boost the rest of the rocket, including the satellite inside of it, into orbit. Spacex negotiated to watch from the Kwajalein Atoll, a U.S. military base. They were to launch DARPA's FalconSat 2. The Falcon 9 was moved to Kwaj and set up on the launch pad. It was ready for launch. Everyone was excited because this rocket had been built privately without any government subsidy, a feat never done before. Launch was scrubbed 4 times. Soon the rocket had been outside for so long that the salt in the air had weakened the joints. The group was beat. The humid, hot air seemed to weigh everyone down. As they fixed the rocket back up, they could only hope that the launch came soon. Saturday, March 25th, 2006 at 9:30 a.m., the Falcon 1 lifted off from the launch pad in Kwaj. It soared upwards through the air, leaving the ground behind as it soared into the tropical air above the island. Then the rocket started to spin, slowly at first, but then faster. Remember, rockets are a super precise thing, and spinning ruins that precision. A fuel line was loose, and with the rocket soaring through the air, there was no way to stop it. It fell out of line with the air, and was ripped apart. The final seconds were captured on camera, before the craft crashed into the ground. Try 2. The team had worked for another year and were ready again. They had everything perfect. The craft was assembled and on a barge to Kwaj. This launch did not have a payload. There would be no satellite, just a dummy weight. March 21st, 2007 at 1:10 p.m., the Falcon 1 lifted off the launch pad. It was SpaceX's second try at launching. This was an important point of success, as Musk only had enough money for about 3 of these launches. If this launch did not succeed, it would mark the beginning of the end for SpaceX. The craft got up, dropped its first largest stage, and fired up its second engine. Everything seemed to be going well. The engineers at Mission Control cheered. They had only a few more minutes to go before success. Then, déjà vu. The rocket started to spin, slowly at first, but then faster. The whole stage began shaking, quickly, oscillating up and down until it could no longer hold itself together. The rocket shattered, along with all the hopes and dreams of the engineers back on Earth. Attempt number 3. Things were beginning to get tense at SpaceX. The clock was ticking. Musk was beginning to run out of money, and would only be able to fund one more launch. There were 3 satellites on board: Trailblazer, a military craft, Nanosail D, and a craft with some ashes for space burial. Everyone piled onto the barge, a common practice at this point, for a potentially final trip to Kwaj. August 3rd, 2008, at 3:35, the Falcon 9 once again lifted from the launch pad. The engineers had been sure to fix everything. The first two launches had provided enough information to fix all the problems. SpaceX had even built a new engine, the Merlin 1C. As the rocket soared through the atmosphere, it seemed that everything was right. The new engine was working perfectly, the weather was looking good, and most importantly, there was no spinning. First stage engine was cut off and disconnected. Suddenly, the first stage began moving upwards. The new engine was taking longer than planned to shut off. The solid steel debris smashed into the rocket above, breaking it apart. Mission Control watched in dismay as their beautiful creation was destroyed by a hastily set stage timer. As their dreams fell to the ground, the group wondered what they would do next. Musk decided he was all in. This was happening, but it was sure to be SpaceX's last chance. Musk was in bad shape. The once multimillionaire who had once owned a private jet flew between his companies on a budget Southwest flights. Nothing could possibly go wrong with this flight. The timer was adjusted and the rocket moved to Quaj. September 28, 2008, the Falcon 1, filled with a dummy weight, lifted off the launch pad and without so much as a problem made it to orbit. The team at Mission Control rejoiced. They had fully, truly made it. NASA soon offered SpaceX a $1.2 billion deal for several missions to the International Space Station. The team began working on a new rocket, the Falcon 9, with not one but 9 Merlin engines powering the first stage. The first launch was successful, along with the next 18 flights, creating an atmosphere of success and confidence. Then, Flight 19 struck. The Falcon 9 flew upwards in its now mundane way, carrying supplies towards the space station. Suddenly, 2 minutes and 19 seconds into the flight, a strut holding up a fuel tank failed. The tank fell down within the rocket and smashed into another tank full of explosive fuel. As you might imagine, things went downhill from there. The rocket fell apart in midair. 3 months later, the Falcon 9 came back with a bang, with the first stage landing in Florida, making history. SpaceX proceeded to land 10 rockets in total, by sea and by land. More history was made just a few months ago, on March 30th, 2017, when one of these landed stages was actually launched back into space. SpaceX proceeded to land 10 rockets in total, by sea and by land. More history was made just a few months ago, on March 30th, 2017, when one of these landed stages was launched back into space. SpaceX has really made an impact in space. It has been the first private company to reach orbit, first private company to dock with the ISS, and the first group to reuse a stage as large as the Falcon 9's first stage. It has overtaken big government-funded entities with its mission of providing smaller, cheaper launches. Its very existence means a lot for the future of space travel. I'm excited that it's in charge.